Hello, everyone, and welcome to another live episode edition of Ordinary People Doing Extraordinary Things. I'm your host, Carrie Roberts, and today we are doing another part of the series I like to call Connected Conversations. And this is where I choose one topic and I bring a panel of people on to kind of talk about that topic. And in some way, shape, or form, it has to do with being human, humanity, connection, human rights, being extraordinary. So today, our special topic is your conversation proud? And I have four wonderful guests with me here today, and a couple of them have actually been on the show before. So I have Shannon Whittington. She is in RN and she's in LGBTQ plus expert. Welcome, Shannon. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thanks.
I have Connor Maddox. He built the first trans program at the LGBT Center of San Diego, California. Welcome, Connor.
Hi. Nice to be here.
Yes, I have Rikki Tea. She also has been on the show. She is a makeup artist, trans social media influencer, and a 2019 Sephora Squad member. Welcome, Rikki.
Hi, thank you for having me again.
Yes, and then I also have Alyssa Bright. She's a novelist, poet, and cyber artist. Welcome, Alyssa. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yes, I'm so thrilled to bring such a group of great people together. And as you're all watching and listening, if you have questions or you want to contribute to the conversation, please feel free to do that as well. So Shannon, I want to start with you. This is June. It is Pride Month. And even though it's Pride Month, Pride should be celebrated every single day. And so I'd love for you to kind of share with us what Pride Month is about, maybe where it started, whatever you can share, and also why you're kind of so involved in this LGBTQ plus space as well.
Well, I'm part of this community. Number one, I'm a gay female. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I've been married to my wonderful wife for 21 years. Pride's been going on for about, I think we're in year 51, if I'm not mistaken. Back in Stonewall 50 years ago here in New York is where things started up. For me, I love this month, but I agree with you when you say that it should be every day. But I love Pride Month because we get to see what organizations are doing around this and which organizations are proud and supporting this community. So that always gives me, an extra boost in my step when I'm walking around and seeing all the rainbows. And I just feel so proud. So I love June.
Well, thank you for kind of that little intro. And like I said, we've had you on the show before, and I'd love for the other three to kind of give just a little bit of your story, however much you want to share. And Connor, I'll start with you. Like we had said, you started kind of the trans program at the LGBT Center in San Diego. So I'd love for you to share a little bit of your story here.
Okay. So I knew all my life that I was transgender. I didn't have that word for it, but I knew I was a boy and I wasn't a girl. And growing up at my age, we didn't have any kind of resources. We didn't know about being transgender. So I just grew up thinking I was some kind of a crazy freak or something. And as I got older, I still felt the same way. I didn't ever change of how I felt inside about being a guy and not a girl. So when I was about 45 years old, I met somebody online who was a trans male, and he explained, all about himself and what was going on and what he did. And for the first time in my life, I had this hope that I could live my life the way I wanted to, as a man, which is what I've always been in my mind. So I started to transition in 2003, and I was up in Los Gatos, California. And then I moved down to San Diego to help out my parents, who were getting pretty old, needed some help. And the first time I went to the center, I went in, I asked what do they have for trans services, and they looked at me like I had two heads. They didn't know what I was talking about. And I said, well, transgender services, and they still had no clue what I was talking about. So I left. And the same thing had happened to me in San Francisco when I walked into their new center. They had no clue what I was talking about either. So I found a guys group that had been active there for quite a while and started going to that, and started on testosterone. And then over the next couple of years, started to meet other trans folks in town. A lot of the ladies were now coming out and saying, we need to get together. We need to let people know we exist and we need services and things. So we kind of all banded together. And then in 2006, I actually was hired by the center to be their facilities manager. So as far as I know, I'm the first transgender employee they ever had. And through my work, they kind of let me do my trans things on the side, which was great. So I did a lot of training for the staff there. And I was doing trainings outside of the center, and I was doing like lecturing in college classes. And then slowly I brought my guys group over there, and then I started about 3 or 4 other groups over the next couple of years for trans folks. And they didn't want to come to the center because they didn't know it, they were afraid of it. And I guess there'd been some bad stuff earlier, but slowly but surely, I got people to come to the center. And so I built the program, started in 2013, and did both jobs for a couple of years, and then just did the trans job. It was a great experience for me. I was thrilled to death to have that position and do the work that I really loved. And that was just, meeting with my community one-on-one and helping them with whatever issues they had, helping them do name changes, to getting the right healthcare professionals hooked up with them, to mental health, all those kinds of little things that we all need as we go through our transitions or just go through life. So it was really, really incredibly rewarding. And I just recently retired. Yeah, it's and I still run my group, and I still help the guys out whenever I can, or the girls. So it's been an experience.
I love that, and I congratulate you, because it's tough as it is, but to do that back then, and even though you're retired, you're still helping so many. So that is so wonderful to hear. Rikki, I'd love for you to share a little bit of your story as well, as much as you'd like to share with us.
Alrighty. Whatchamacallit? I don't know. I guess I'll just start from like when I kind of like first felt like I was kind of a girl, I guess you would say. My entire life I've been very, very feminine. And then I was born with Klippfelter syndrome, which is basically where like men have XY chromosomes and then females have XX chromosomes, and then I have XXY. So my kind of like genetic pattern is a little bit more on the middle ground. And then also like my body is more feminized than what a natural, like just a regular born male would be, which definitely has helped along with my transition. I will say it definitely has its advantages. But all of my childhood, I was very feminine, played with dolls. I got along with all of my female cousins more than my male cousins. And then especially growing up, like when I was raised by my grandparents, I would always go to like the hair salon with my grandma versus going to like the shop with my grandpa. And then through growing up, I definitely had like a lot of hardships and a lot of like rough experiences that definitely have shaped me into the person that I am today. But like through conquering them and really like having the hardships that I've had, I definitely have become stronger with those. And I know like the very first time that I ever like kind of like admitted to myself that I was transgender was when I actually was with one of my very, very, very close friends. And I feel like this is a realization a lot of people have. I was drunk, and I kind of was like, I always had this thought in my head, but I never verbalized it because I had the fear that if you verbalize something, that it kind of made it real, and that it was like bringing it to actuality. And I finally verbalized it, and from that point on, like I remember I went to the bathroom and I like cried, and I was like, I'm never saying that again. I'm never like, I can't do that. Like if I do that, I'll be like a disgrace to my family, or I'll be just not right. And it was something that definitely damaged me for a long time, but then I surrounded myself with people who were genuinely very good and very high quality, like just individuals as people, and they kind of just let me be me, and they never questioned me. They never like asked what I was. They never like really said like, why do you wear more feminine things or do makeup or anything like that. And it really helped me to be more and more comfortable with myself until the point that I knew that I did want to like fully transition, and I wanted to go on hormones, and I wanted to like really go all the way and like be who I really felt like I was. I mean, I didn't feel like if I was true to myself, then I would be like the bad person that I originally thought that I would be. And then kind of like going into like influencing and what I do as like a day-to-day job, like that's where like my main strive comes from, is like showing people that like no matter what kind of background you come from, no matter what kind of like negativities you face or hardships that you may have challenged, or even like for me recently, like I had a huge falling out with my elder brother, and basically it literally was over a TikTok that he was mad that I was kind of like yeah, it was basically like he was mad that I was uplifting people and saying that you can like be okay after coming out. And like, because I definitely, after I came out, I lost a lot of suicidal thoughts, and like they didn't understand how that could like be a thing. Like they just thought it was like a huge negative. Yeah, like I just always want to be able to like inspire people and show them that they'll be okay in the future and they can always smile forward. That's probably my favorite part of my job, is being able to like see the messages that I get from people and say that I have inspired them, or that I have helped them come out, or I have helped them like realize that they don't have to wear the normal like gender binary clothes or whatever. They can like continue to do whatever they want in their style, and they can really be free in themselves without having to worry about like the prosecution from others.
I am sitting here smiling. Rikki, that was beautifully said. And again, I'm really proud of you as well. I for those of you that don't know, she is a tremendous makeup and hair artist. Actually, when I interviewed her last time, she gave me some tips, which I still think of today. I was like, oh, this is how a better way to do eyeshadow. So it's amazing. Yes. And I think, Rikki, one thing I just want to point out before we go to Alyssa, you had said that when you decided, okay, I'm going to be trans, and I verbalized that and I'm okay, you said the suicidal thoughts went away.
Yeah, it was kind of like realizing the fears that like I've always kind of like put down on myself. And then like once I finally like let them go, like I realized like, oh my God, like saying it isn't going to be like this magic death word for me. Like it's okay. Like I'm still me. I'm still exactly who I am, but it's not like it's not something I have to be afraid of. And I think that's also like, I know this is like I'm a very, very rare case, and I'm happy in the sense that like my name is kind of like gender binary. I feel like I've met female Rikkis and male Rikkis, but like I've been Rikki my whole life. I've never changed my name, and I don't really have any plans to. But like it's also like kind of a standpoint for me that like even though you do transition, like you're not a different human being. Like you're not a different soul. You're the same exact like person. You're just being who you are really, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Beautiful. Beautifully said, Rikki. I'm so excited to have you all here. Alyssa, I'd love for you to share a little bit again of your story, what you feel comfortable with sharing as well.
So I'm kind of on a sort of opposite end of like the binary trans woman paradigm from Rikki, because I spent most of my life under the sort of assumption applied to me and then internalized by me, of course, that I was just like a straight cis dude. And now that I'm a lady, I'm mostly like lesbian inclined. And that does tend to be there's like a type A binary trans woman and a type B, and I'm in that B category of somebody who never really had any idea that they had like gender issues or dysphoria or anything until it just suddenly hit me when I was like 23, I think. It was after work one night. I was living in my mom's after college, and I just went into the bathroom for whatever reason, brushing my teeth maybe. And I looked in the mirror, and there was something. I've had long hair for like a while now because of my it was because of dysphoria. I didn't know that at the time. I thought I just liked long hair because I was into like heavy metal and stuff. And I just looked in the mirror, and all of a sudden this question just pierced me. The metaphor that occurred to me at the time that still kind of holds true is that it felt like a stray bullet like came through my window, just like hit me in the arm. And they were just sitting there like, what the hell just happened? And the question was like, am I a girl? And it actually came out of my mouth. It was very cliche in that sense. And I went to bed that night just like consumed by that thought. And then I spent the next couple of weeks, I was working at UPS, the package handler, which is hellish job. And I was like, spent the next week locked in a metal box, moving smaller boxes around at a frantic pace and just like sweating and having panic attacks about it. Like thinking like, this can't possibly be true. Oh my God, this is going to ruin my life. And, I had to slowly sort of dialogue with myself for a couple of weeks and like go out and start getting, clothing and stuff to, in the classic fashion, kind of explore and experiment. And after a couple of weeks of that, I came out about it to my therapist. She was supportive, but the wrinkle in that was that I was in like a 5-year long-term relationship with a straight cis girl, who at the time was like the love of my life. And I was deathly afraid that she was not gonna receive it well, not for like transphobic reasons per se, but just because that ended up happening basically. And I came out to her, and it caused the last like 6 months of our relationship to be really like lots of very vicious fighting between the two of us, because she was like terrified of losing her boyfriend. And I knew that like, if I didn't do something about this for like my entire life, that I would probably kill myself someday. And I know that's not an uncommon thought for someone in that position. And so eventually we had to break up, and that left me like totally shattered and spiraling in dysphoria and what I now realize is undiagnosed OCD, a lot of other things. So for me, that revelation really did kind of like burn my old life to ashes around me. And I spent the next like couple of years kind of incubating until I met my current partner, who gave me the like safety and acceptance to actually start transitioning. And that was a couple of years ago now. Yeah, 2018, June 2018 was when I started transitioning. And it's been a really rocky road, lots of mental illness and unhappiness. And it took me a long, long time, like probably at least like a year and a half after transitioning initially, to come to a place where I could say that I was proud in any way, because people would ask me about it, and I'd be, even though I had mostly only good experiences with the people in my life being supportive, and most of them, even when I first came out to them, were like, yeah, I'm not surprised, which is a wild thing to hear when you're dealing with something so profoundly surreal, because like, I'm surprised. Why didn't you tell me? Holy shit. But now, I mean, they used to ask me like about pride and stuff, and I was like, no, I feel ashamed because of how this has affected my life, and because of how I've seen people like us be treated by the media and society and whatnot. But after a lot of struggle, and honestly, like, it's cheesy, but buying a trans pride flag and like hanging it on the outside of my little shack where I live really was like a first step in that direction. Because now every time I walk into my house, I just see that emblazoned for the world to see, because I don't know, I'm kind of a confrontational person in that respect. And I want people to know, and I believe in like radical vulnerability in that respect. So that has really been like the keyhole through which I came into being, was that kind of radical honesty and vulnerability, because I have not found any other way to exist as trans for myself that that has the same sort of, I don't know, resonance, and like Rikki was talking about bringing something into actuality by saying it, and I'm a strong believer in that. The philosophical concept of like reification, making something real, by verbalizing it and externalizing it. And that's really all transitioning kind of is on a fundamental level.
I want to say to you too, Alyssa, I want to thank you for your honesty and vulnerability, and congratulate you on your acceptance of yourself in this transition. I just want to say first, as I listen to these stories, you know, in some ways it's like, it's not different from other people. You know, we all want to be accepted. We all want to feel our full self, and it just kind of is in a slightly different way. And Shannon, I'd love for you to, what are some of your thoughts? Because again, you are not trans, but you work so much with this community, and you hear these stories and you advocate for trans within the workplace. And I'm just curious, as you're hearing the three of them be so honest with their stories, what your thoughts are.
Well, you know, I really appreciate the honesty, and everyone's story is so individual, you know, but, you know, from a professional level, as far as it's concerned, you know, I don't think that trans people want anything any different than anyone else. It's not like people who are trans are leading with being trans. They're leading with being people who happen to be trans. And, you know, when I do a lot of teaching around this, I tell people, you know, people often don't understand. And it's really about creating an awareness, you know. And once I have people who have left my training, and they'll say, oh my gosh, I had no idea. I mean, we're hearing these individuals talk about suicidal ideations and how the dysphoria and how what that was like. And, you know, within this population is a very high suicide rate. But, you know, just like me for being gay, I just want to be accepted. You know, we know that we're going to live in a heteronormative world until the end of time. We're going to live in a binary world until the end of time. But there's a lot that exists in between those spectrums. And it's not like we're asking people to agree or whatever. We just want to, you know, let us be, you know, like my mom says, you be you and let me be me. That's all. That's all we really want.
Yeah, I could not agree more. And I want to, you know, as we kind of have some discussions, I want to answer a couple of questions that I think a lot of people have if they're not in the trans community. Rikki, I'd love for you to start. If you could kind of give us the difference between sexual preferences versus gender identity, because I think people that don't understand are a little bit confused. Can you kind of tell us a little bit more about what the differences are?
So I would really say that, like, it's such a complex one, because I feel like that's something that gets misconstrued and, like, kind of jumbled a lot, I would say. Definitely, like, gender identity is something to where you, like, feel as one thing. So your gender identity can be, like, me being transgender, as I feel that I'm a woman inside, even though I was born male. And then, like, but your gender identity could even be, like, if you're cisgender, if you feel that you're one gender, that you are the gender that you were born. And then non-binary would be, like, kind of in the middle, to where you don't feel a strong connection towards either, really. And I would say non-binary kind of falls in, like, the androgynous field as well. To where you're not really, like, really siding on one side. But the main difference, I would say, between gender identity and sexual orientation is that gender identity is what you identify as, meaning yourself, and then sexual orientation would be something to what you are attracted to. So, like, whether you're straight, being attracted to the opposite gender in which you identify as. So, like, me being a trans woman and how I am attracted to men, then I am a straight woman, and that would be my sexual orientation. Meanwhile, if you are, like, say, a cis man who is attracted to both men and women, then you would be bisexual. And then it kind of just like goes and builds on the ladder from there, I would say. So I guess in layman's terms, it would be gender identity is what you feel that you are, and then sexual orientation would be what you are attracted to, like what gender identity you are attracted to.
Yeah, I think that's very simply and easily said. That's how it was explained to me, and I think that makes a ton of sense, and I thank you for speaking to that. And Connor, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about, oh yeah, go ahead, Shannon.
I just want to say one thing on that, because that's so difficult to explain. I think, Rikki, you did a good job. I always say that orientation is who you go to bed with, and gender is who you go to bed as.
Oh, say it again.
That actually, I like that a lot. I like that a lot.
Say it again, Shannon. Everybody was like, yes, say it again.
Like, I'm a cis woman. I'm a cisgender woman. I go to bed with my wife. That's who I'm attracted to. That's my orientation. I go to bed as a woman, you know, because they're like the terminology, and I was understanding everything that Rikki was saying. And when we are part of this community, it's like a whole other language. But for people who are heterosexual, they're like, by what, gender nonconforming, gender queer, gender fluid, what are you talking about? You know, so when I explain it like that, orientation is who you go to bed with, gender is who you go to bed as, they're like, oh, I get it.
Yeah, it does help explain it.
Yes, Shannon. And for those of you that don't know Shannon well, she does some great videos and great analogies on all sorts of things. I remember that from our last call. That Shannon, I like that a lot. Connor, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about what your definition of trans is and what the pronouns mean. You have he, she, and they. If you can kind of describe that a little bit.
Sure, but I'd like to back up just 1 second.
Yeah.
When you asked the question about the sexual orientation, and so you said sexual preference, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when I train, I don't use the word preference because that implies a choice. What I prefer, see, that implies that we choose things, that we choose to be gay, we choose to be trans, we choose to be whatever. So we never use that word preference because then people think, see, that's you can not be gay if you want to.
Yeah.
So I always make sure that when I train people, it's like, just what is your sexual orientation? You know, you were born with an orientation, and what is it? But
I thank you. I say a lot on this show. I appreciate when I'm called out, and I thank you for teaching me in this moment because I think words make a big difference. So thank you for that for me and for anyone listening. Sexual orientation is the correct term. Thank you. I really appreciate that, Connor. Thank you so much. Yeah. So yeah, going to the other piece again, kind of your definition of trans and what's the difference between he, she, and they for those that are not clear.
Sure. Wow, trans has always been kind of an umbrella term, but now the umbrella is really huge. So transgender basically means, you know, like across gender. So it included folks that were born a certain way, but they knew that they actually belonged to the opposite gender, where it was very binary, the way it used to be. And lots of people were under this umbrella. So it was, we defined it in the early days as transsexual, which is somebody like me that knew I was a boy, not a girl, and that's who I felt like. And then we had like drag queens, which were usually like gay men who like to dress up in drag and to perform. And we had like people that it was like Pat from Saturday Night Live, you know, the ambiguous type folks. And as times have changed, so we now kind of have the transgender people who have lots of different names for themselves. So for me, I'm a trans man, I'm a T-male, I'm an F to M, female to male. I am just transgender. I'm just a man. So I have lots of titles I can use for myself or labels. But now we've added all the non-binary folks and the gender non-conforming folks. So trying to explain all of that to people can be pretty tough. But for me, how I look at it is my gender identity is male. And I know that I was born that way because I've been like that all my life. I remember being 3 years old and knowing that I was a boy. I'm absolutely convinced that it's part of my DNA, that it wasn't an accident. I didn't get dropped on my head. Well, I did, but not because that didn't change it. And you know that there's no choice involved. It's like having brown eyes or right-handed, left-handed. It's just part of who you are. And then there's like Rikki was saying, you know, there's a whole slew of what we call intersex, with people with different chromosomal differences. So those to me fall under the umbrella because I actually believe it's the other way around. I believe that we're all intersex. So my intersex issue is that I don't have any physical manifestations of it, but I do have in my head, my brain is intersexed. Someday this will prove me right about this. I know. So then we go to like non-binary. Now they don't look at gender as and binary. They look at it as and there's lots of descriptions. So like stars in the sky or a spectrum on a line or any way you want to picture it, but it makes a lot of sense because gender isn't one thing, right? It's not just male and all males are exactly the same, or female and all the females are exactly the same. That's not how our world exists, right? We all know men who are very much more feminine, you know, women who are very masculine, and they get to claim their gender identity, and the way they behave and dress, that doesn't define their gender. And that's what we do a lot of times, we stereotype, right? So we'll say, oh, that guy's gay, of course, because, you know, he wears pink shirts and he's always neat, you know. So we don't get into the stereotypes because we know now that there's tons of different identities out there and everyone has the right to claim their own and describe it and say what it is for them. So a lot of our younger kids, everybody's a kid to me because I'm old, but they just basically are like, my identity is that I believe part of me is female and part of me is male and part of me is just all of them together. Or, you know, I don't have a gender identity. I'm just a person. I'm a human. And it's pretty neat because everybody could just, they're who they say they are. And who cares, right? I mean, why are we so stuck on having to label everything? Especially, you know, the binary, because it's so not true. We don't have a binary world. And then you get into the pronouns. So for me, I choose the binary pronouns of he, him, his. Those are my pronouns when you address me. And for a lot of the ladies, they choose the binary female. So it's she, her, hers. But for our gender nonconforming and our non-binary folks, those don't apply to them because they're not binary. So they use now the they, them, theirs. Now everybody's like, oh, no, that's plural, it's plural. But it's actually been changed in the dictionary a couple of years ago, if you look it up, that they can now be used as a singular pronoun. So it's perfectly English correct to say, just the word they want to do this. They need to go to the store and meeting one person. So the trick is to be educated about pronouns and people and trying to be as respectful as possible. If you care about all of this and you care about other people and you want to make them feel kind and you want to make them feel comfortable in your presence or in your classroom or wherever it is at work, respect their pronouns. And if you have a really hard time doing that, I usually suggest to just use the person's name. But you should really practice using the right pronoun. And if you screw it up, which even I do, then you apologize immediately. I said she, I meant he. I'm so sorry. I'm working on it. And then, you go on from there. But we have so many instances of people using the pronoun as a weapon. They do it on purpose. They do it over and over and say, I'm sorry, but they're not. They're actually using it to hurt the person, to embarrass them, to make them feel bad. So pronouns become very, very important. A lot of us now on our stationery, our email signatures, we put our pronouns on those. We put our pronouns on everything. In a meeting, put your name and then your pronouns underneath. And that way, if there is a trans person in the room, they won't feel so out of place being the only one who has to explain their pronouns. They can just put their pronouns right on their name tag. So lots of little things you can do to make trans folks feel much more welcome in their circle that they're in with you.
Well, again, I'm learning a ton. I love the breakdown of what you're saying. Do the rest of you have any comments to what Connor just said that you'd like to share? Go ahead, Alyssa.
So building on what you were saying just now, Connor, I find that people, especially cishet people, but people in general have this mistaken idea that language is somehow essentialist and something that exists to define reality rather than to describe it. And we have to accept the fact, and I think the pronoun debate, I feel terrible even dignifying it with the term debate, but people with bad faith treat it that way. It is a good window into the fact that language is a technology that is used by rather arbitrary guidelines that we've agreed upon in order to designate and describe reality. And the whole pushback about they being a singular pronoun is, I'm going to get a little blue here, but it's completely bullshit because Shakespeare was using it as a singular pronoun. Everybody uses it as a singular pronoun every day. If you see somebody of indeterminate gender because, say, they're like 200 yards away from you and your vision's not great and they're not necessarily wearing like a flowing dress or any kind of really concrete gender signifier, you say they to describe that person. So when people try and bring that up, I immediately treat it as like a bad faith critique intended to undermine the struggle for trans acceptance, because that's kind of fundamentally what it is. It's ignoring something that is obviously true about the English language and how we have been using it for hundreds of years. So that's my piece.
Yeah. Shannon or Rikki, do you have any feedback? I'm learning a ton. I never thought about that. And I love that you're bringing in some of the history there too, Alyssa. I like that.
Yeah. Thank you too. I didn't know that last piece. So thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I do. In New York, if you continuously misgender a trans person, your organization can be fined. You can be fined $250,000. So, I talk about the importance of pronouns so much. Here's the thing. Don't assume, because a lot of times you're going to be wrong, and it depends on which generation you come from. If you feel comfortable asking this question, you go into a high school today, you go into a progressive college today, people are asking pronouns. You've got non-binary, gender non-conforming people there, and it's just fine. One day they show up dressed more femme, one day they show up dressed more masculine. I mean, I think that, like Connor was saying, you know, he says, I'm intersex inside, but we really are, the sex is more alike than we care to admit. It's society that has separated these sexes and caused all these different type of issues with that. You know, so if you say they left their phone, I mean, you're going to say, I'm giving them their phone, you know?
Yeah.
So, and the thing also is to asking a pronoun shows cultural humility, right? Misgendering someone is very painful, very hurtful. You know, immediately apologize. Have I misgendered someone? Absolutely. You know, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to misgender you. Then keep the conversation moving, because that person that you're talking to doesn't want to have to make you feel better for your mistake. That's not the thing, is not the thing. Apologize and keep it moving. Don't concentrate on the pronoun issue, but just be aware of it. And don't be afraid to ask the question. Ask the question. You know, for older people, baby boomers, people who are like, I don't know, 40s, 50s, you know, that's the people that kind of don't get it, you know, because we're not used to asking that question. This is new for us. This is new language for us. So that's when you just have to be taught.
Yeah, again, I thank you. I like that you're saying it's okay to ask what pronoun you go by. That I would assume you all appreciate that more than somebody assuming or not asking, correct?
Yeah.
I would say so.
Yeah, go ahead. No, Alyssa, I mean, it's good. We're having different opinions here. Alyssa, what is your thought on that?
So I have experienced a lot of occasions, and this has been something that has been brought up on the sort of modern, like, cutting edge of gender discourse here. But I get people who, I regularly get misgendered by almost every service worker that I encounter, for example. And that's kind of hilarious to me, because I look like this. Like, I get it. I don't pass bullshit concept anyway, but like I'm a pretty femme person, and so I express myself that way. But the flip side of greater visibility and understanding for trans people, the flip side of people not reacting to seeing someone like me and immediately assuming like you're a freak, you're a man in a dress, etc., is that sometimes it seems like they just look at me and they see what I'm wearing and they see the makeup and the hair and all of the gender signifiers that I'm sending off. And in some quasi woke attempt to not make assumptions that I'm a woman, they swing the other way and they just assume that I'm a dude who just likes to dress like this because it's like, it's 2020, a man can wear a dress. And it's really frustrating because it's like, come on, gendering is an active process. We do it every day to everybody. You gender every single person you walk down the street past based on cues, none of which have anything to do with biology. For the most part, most of them are social, like clothes and body language. So I'm like, I'm serving femininity right now, and you are seeing that I am not, in your eyes, biologically female. And that ought to be a clue that you can assume that I am a trans woman and that you should call me she. So in that respect, I wish people would assume more, but rather than assuming, I guess the better word would be infer, like pay attention, be literate about gender, because it is a language and it is being used to communicate, and don't just ignore all of the linguistic cues of gender that I'm putting out there. Because I mean, even sometimes when I'm asked my pronouns in like a queer space, I feel a little misgendered because it's like a reminder that like, oh, people, I'm not femme looking enough physically in order for people to immediately read me as female. Essentially, it's a reminder that I don't pass. And it's a very complicated issue, especially within queer spaces. But, you know, I would just ask that, like, if you see somebody that is in a dress and has beard shadow and is wearing makeup, like it's a pretty safe assumption that they're a she or a they. So don't fucking say he for any reason in that situation, because you're probably going to be wrong most of the time and you're going to make somebody feel terrible.
Yep. And what I do a lot is, if I'm not sure, and I'm talking to a person, I'm meeting them. So I go up to them and say, hey, my name's Connor and my pronouns are he, him, his. And then they can introduce back to me with their pronouns. So I've done it first. It makes it more comfortable for them to tell me theirs.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also, Connor, I think it's a good idea to use the name,
Yeah.
Yeah, that's always the safest fallback.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that way you can't go wrong.
Yeah, and I want to, Rikki and Alyssa, I'd love to you to speak to this as well as Connor. So Connor, you talked about your transition a while back. You're kind of leading the path for some people that are going through this now. I'm curious, Rikki, let's have you talk for a moment. Before you transitioned, did you have role models? I know Alyssa had told me she did not. She was the first trans woman that she knew. Trans person or trans woman, did you tell me?
Trans person, really.
Trans
I mean, there was somebody at my high school who later turned out to be a trans man, but we were never close or even really spoke much. And so he wasn't like on my mind when I was early in transition. So, and other than that, it was my only role model was like porn, which there's a whole can of worms.
Rikki, did you have any exposure to trans before? What was it like for you?
So for me, I honestly didn't really have like many role models. Really any, honestly. I was kind of like gradually kind of just, I don't know, honestly. That's kind of difficult for me to say as like a trans role model. Honestly, not really. I'm very much so in the sense of like, I like the ideals of like role models in the sense of like modeling yourself in like a business standpoint and like what people like, even possibly for the sense of like what people look like, but like mostly for the sense of like what people are like their ideals maybe. But I'm very much so like my whole kind of like life has kind of been about like creating myself. So I've never wanted, like, even for me, like, going through having, like, transitional surgeries even now and, like, let's say, like, getting filler and, like, doing all of the things that I do on, like, a daily basis, I never really aim to look like someone. Like, at the end of the day, I always want to look like Rikki Tea. And I definitely, like, I like being, I guess, like, a role model, and I like being someone who can like kind of like lead others as almost like a guidepost and like an example. And I guess that can kind of also tie into like things beforehand of like what everyone was saying about like passing and not passing and whatnot. Like I've always kind of had a little bit of like passing privilege, like even before I came out as transgender. Like I've always been like kind of hyper feminine. And I've always like been into makeup and I've always done like very feminine things and like worn androgynous styles and whatnot, and I eased myself very, very hardcore into it. So like for me, I would go off of various like makeup YouTubers, and then from there eventually I started looking at like Eden the Doll, Elena Genevieve, like Blair White, Nikita Dragon, like those kind of like trans women, not really as like what do I want to be, but like almost as like tips and advice kind of, and almost like I was getting like advice from peers, like in my own society. That's how my kind of mindset was on it. But like I've always kind of like for my whole transition kind of had in my head that like I want to model myself to be like my own role model, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I love that you're doing that. Connor, for you back then and even now, as you're hearing both Alyssa and Rikki talk, I'm just curious what your thoughts and feelings are. Do you feel like it's similar? Do you feel like it's changed in 2020 at all?
Um, for most people, I think it's changed. I'm intrigued by both their stories because um, most kids today have seen and heard and been involved with some kind of trans person or community or something. So to hear people that really didn't have much of a role model, you're a fast dying breed. Um, I didn't transition until I was 50 years old, and that's because I didn't know that it existed. I knew that the uh, the the women could transition. Um, I knew all about I never remember her name. Um, the army lady that she transitioned way back in the 50s. Um, but it never occurred to me that it could go the other way.
Christine Jorgensen, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Um, so um, I think it's a matter of trying to find people who are trans near you, and some people just do it in their own space in their own way, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that either. Um, I think probably where Lissa lives has a lot to do with it. The rural places, they don't have um, meetings, they don't have centers. And so they don't have any place to go and reach out and meet with other folks. And that makes it really difficult to be alone in doing this. Um, and Rikki would, she just knows who she is. I mean, they both do, but she just goes out and does her thing, and doesn't feel she needs a role model, because she's her own role model, and that's really great too. But we need more people like these two ladies to go out in the community and help mentor our young kids. They need role models. Now that we have them, now they exist. Um, we need to be able to get in touch with our youth and give them good role models, that'll help them to transition into good people and not have them become, angry and all the terrible things that can happen. We lost, I think it's been 4 years now. We lost 4 teenagers in San Diego to suicide within a few months of each other. And 2 of them, I run a family group, and 2 of them are from my group. And I'll tell you, you don't ever want to go through that ever again, and their families. And so we need some folks to step up and help the kids, get through all this.
Well, I congratulate all of you for doing that. I mean, you're doing that on this show, you're doing that in your daily life on social media. Like you said, it's huge. I'm curious for each of you, if you could give one piece of advice for people that are trans or going through a transition or feeling like they maybe should, what your piece of advice would be. And the other one, what's one piece of advice for people that aren't in this community, that don't understand what's something that they can do to educate themselves or to help? And Shannon, I'll start with you first.
Well, to educate yourself and to help, I mean, YouTube can be your best friend. Just Google what you don't know about and try to learn. I always say that we don't know what we don't know, but we don't even know we don't know it. So, and what was the first part of the question?
First one? Yeah. For anyone that is trans or going through the transition, do you have one piece of advice for them as well?
Well, if you're going through the transition, I mean, this is a long process, right? You've got to be diagnosed with gender dysphoria. You've got to exist in this gender for at least a year. What I find in the work that I do is a lot of times these individuals want to rush into these surgeries. And like here in New York, sometimes it can be a 6-month to 1 year waiting list. And they want to rush into having the surgery. And my advice is to find a reputable surgeon, look at their work, read everything you can about them, the reviews and all of that, and wait. Wait for the best person to do your surgery. If you're going to do bottom surgery, you're going to do top surgery. If you're going to do facial film surgery, wait for the best person, because what I find a lot of times is that people don't want to wait. And then there's a lot of really bad surgeons, to be honest. And here in New York, we have great surgeons, but it's not like that all over the country. There's other places in the country that's really good. So wait to find that really good surgeon. Like if I'm going to go for vaginoplasty, right? And I'm going to transition from male to female and get a new vagina. I want someone who's making vaginas every day. I don't want someone who's doing feet one day and ankles and necks and knees. You know, I want someone who only does that, who has perfected it. So I would say find a really good surgeon and a good support system too, because it's a big surgery. These surgeries are big surgeries. They're no walk in the park, and you're going to need a good support system. You're really, really going to need that.
Alyssa, what is your one piece of advice for those that are trans and those who are not, to kind of educate and understand and help?
Okay. This might be a little long-winded, but I'll try to keep it brief. My advice for trans people who are going through, especially the early stages of transition, but this really applies on a lifelong basis, I would say. So I'm a firm believer in a certain amount of ruthlessness when it comes to interpersonal relationships. If somebody repeatedly disrespects your pronouns, like Connor said, that is a use of pronouns in a weaponized form. That's abuse, and you should feel, I'm not going to tell anybody how to handle their own family or their own friends, but if you feel like you can't cut someone out of your life out of guilt, fuck that. They deserve it, and you deserve it, because you need to be surrounded by people who support you, who understand you, who do not deny what you are, because I think it was Huey Newton who said, "He who denies what I am attacks me or opposes me." And that is 100% true. Like, there are two sides when it comes to trans liberation and trans rights. You're for or you're against. And we need to surround ourselves with people who are for, and we need to educate the ones who are on the fence. And if somebody is not receptive to that education, shove your middle finger in their face and back swiftly out of their lives. And maybe they'll miss you after you're gone, and maybe they'll reach out to you someday and be like, "I'm sorry, I get it now." So that's my piece of advice. Don't be afraid or beholden to guilt, because you're fighting for your life. And then my piece of advice for, especially, I'll call them the straights of the world, the cishets. This goes back to something that Shannon was saying earlier, about how we're always going to live in a heteronormative world. I actually disagree with that pretty powerfully, because granted, this is a bit of a fringe position, but politically I'm like a revolutionary communist. And I firmly believe that the status quo that we live in now, which is fundamentally sexist, racist, homophobic, transphobic, etc., absolutely needs to be burned to the ground and rebuilt into something that is equitable and just. And because my sort of political guiding star, when it comes to trans liberation especially, is the knowledge that if I had known what I was and what I could do to make that real a good 15 years earlier, I would have been saved an ocean of unspeakable, indescribable agony that I have lived through. And it is incumbent upon all of us, trans, cis, etc., to right that wrong. Because if you think about it, think about all of the trans people who have lived up to this point in history, whose bodies were, for lack of a better word, this is my description for myself, don't apply it to yourself if it doesn't resonate with you. But I would describe having been forced by ignorance, which was enforced by society, to go through what was essentially the wrong puberty, kind of mutilated my body permanently in a lot of ways that I am struggling to fix with hormones and surgery. And I could have had such a better outcome if I had transitioned earlier. And I know that that's true about a lot of people. My heart aches for everybody who doesn't realize until they're 30, 40, 50, etc., because that's years of your life you never get back. That's what this right here is. That's 26 years of my life that I'll never get back. Like, yeah, they were mine, but I was also imprisoned within my own life. And I think that that's a legitimate atrocity that has been committed over the course of history by cisgendered society. And the number one thing that we should be trying to do is to prevent that from ever happening again to a single trans kid. And I know that that's an absolutist position, and it's not ever going to be truly possible, but we can strive to create a world where the forces of normativity, which is fundamentally toxic and oppressive, no longer hold that kind of sway. And to me, that means institutional sort of revolt and deconstruction. So don't gender babies. That's a good way to start. We talk a lot as trans people about being assigned male or assigned female at birth. Don't assign it. Call babies, call children they. I know that might sound like a big ask, but it's really not that hard. And dialogue with them, introduce gender to them as something that is not a choice in that sense, but that is their decision and that is their right and theirs alone to define for themselves. And if somebody had, and I'm not blaming my parents or anybody, because nobody knew any better in my life, but if we all did that to every kid, so much agony would be erased from this world. So
I love your passion, Alyssa, and your strength and honesty and your conviction in the way that you speak. And I appreciate you bringing that onto this show. Rikki, I'd love to hear your thoughts as well. Again, maybe one thing of advice for those in the trans community and one for those that are not, and kind of educating and help supporting those that are.
So for education, I probably would say definitely like what Shannon said, YouTube is a magical land of knowledge that is something that many generations have not had before, and I think to not utilize it is definitely foolish because you can learn so much off of it. But then also, honestly, if you have a trans friend or you have someone that you're comfortable talking to in the LGBT community, literally just like sitting aside with them one night while you're hanging out, or just like sending them a text and being like, hey, I really don't understand this much. Do you think you could possibly like help me understand it a little bit more? It's the exact same way of just like how in recent matters there was like everything that's been happening with Black Lives Matter. Like if you don't really understand something or you don't understand Juneteenth or anything like that, you can like message one of your friends and be like, hey, I really don't understand this. Do you think you could give me a little bit more insight on it? And that's really the quickest and easiest way to get like an honest and like for sure answers that you need, but then also in like a healthy and like positive surrounding. And then for advice I would give, definitely mine is a little bit more opposite. I've kind of lived like my whole life, I don't really like, before I transitioned and now after transitioning, I genuinely don't really care what people call me. Like I pass fairly well, and if someone wants to like call me a man or call me by the wrong pronoun, genuinely to me, I don't care, because caring about that and really giving it any mind when it's someone who's purposely doing it is just going to give yourself a wrinkle, and I don't have time or money to waste on gaining a wrinkle from the amount of skincare I use.
Yes.
And that's it. I mean, honestly, like that's the tea on it. Like you really, like at the end of the day, like you have to be comfortable in yourself, and you have to definitely know like how much love you have in yourself, and you can't let another person who's not you affect how much love you have in yourself. And like definitely like responding with enough hate will instill like a small seed of hate in yourself. So therefore, I always try and go towards like the positive route. And if the positive route doesn't work, then cut them off and walk away. It really isn't that much, and you'll get a lot more done in life.
I love it. Connor, any advice on your side, again, for those that are trans or for those that are not?
For those that are, you don't have to do this alone, and you shouldn't, because that's just too much to take on. Do your research. Find if there's some kind of group near you. Check it at universities. Sometimes they have LGBT or trans groups that you can attend. Look for community centers like we have. Go online and just research. And there are tons of online groups that you can join. Facebook has, I don't know how many trans groups that you can join just to talk to people and get information from. I'm amazed to this day how many young folks I meet, and I'm talking, I work with 18 years old and up, that they come in and they're like, I want testosterone, I want estrogen. And I'm like, well, what do you know about it? Well, nothing, I just want it. They're going to take these surgeries, like Shannon said, and put these drugs in their veins, and they don't even know what it does, right? They don't know what it does to them. So they need to educate themselves and seek out people who can help educate them and counsel them. Today, there's no excuse because of the internet is just, it's got everything there. When this pandemic hit, Center put all of our groups on Zoom. So every week we do every meeting on Zoom. And somehow along the way, we've collected people from all over the country coming to our Zoom meetings, which has been amazing and fantastic because we have folks that have nothing where they live, and now they're part of our group. So now we got to figure out how to keep them when we go back to meeting face to face. But, it's something for them to have found us. It's really been helpful. And for other people, I've been doing educating for the last 18 years. And if they don't want to learn, they're not going to. That's how I see it. I've met with so many parents and siblings, but you try to get across to them. You gotta touch them in their heart. You've got to find a way. It's not intellectual that's going to change them. It's not with facts. It's with, hey, I'm gonna reach your heart somehow. I'm gonna tell my story or somebody else's story, and maybe that'll get through to your cold blue heart. I think that makes a huge difference. You can find reading things for them. We have a group at the center that I made. It's we call it our SOFA group. So it stands for Significant Other.
Oh, it looks like we lost Connor for just a moment. I just want to finish up, and hopefully we can get him back on to finish. If people want to connect with either of you, oh, Connor, go ahead. We lost you for a moment. I'll let you finish. Go ahead. You were talking about the SOFA group. Go ahead.
Yeah. So that's a group where anybody from the family or friends can come and talk to each other about the struggles that they're having, accepting a family member or dealing with whatever is different and new. Or like when we do it with just the guys and their significant others, you can bitch about us and we'll bitch about you over here at our own meeting. But it's really helpful for them to have a touchstone place to go. And because I don't transition by myself, my whole family transitions with me, right? It's a family or a friend or whatever, so they need support as well. The family and others, just try to educate as best you can and hope that you can get through to them.
So if people, again, you don't have to give anything, but I always put this out if people want to connect with each of you. So Connor, if people want to connect with you, or, you were talking about some of these Zoom meetings, or if they have questions, is there a website or social media that's great for them to connect either with you or the center that you work with?
For me, just on Facebook, it's just Connor Maddox. And the center, they can just go to the website, the It's the I'm gonna forget this now. Yeah, the LGBT Center.
In San Diego.
Yeah,
Yeah. So if you Google it, you can look on there as well.
yeah.
Shannon, where can people connect with you if they'd like to do that as well?
Well, they can go to my website, whittingtonconsulting.com. But if they want to get me like right away, just put in my name that you see there on the screen on LinkedIn, and I will connect with you. You can DM me and we can chat from there.
Perfect. And Alyssa, is there a way if people want to connect with you? Is there something you'd like to share?
Yeah, I don't really have any social media besides Instagram, and that's where I do all of my stuff, all of my like advocacy and poetry and stuff like that, art. And that's Instagram at Heavy Metal Witch Queen. And if you can't find that, just search for me by name, Alyssa Bright.
Perfect. And Rikki, what about yourself? Where can people connect with you if they'd like to do that?
So all of my social media, including like YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, TikTok, is all going to be at Rikki_Tea, like a drink, or you can find me on Snapchat at How to Selfie.
Perfect. I want to congratulate all of you for the work that you're doing on yourself, for others, for sharing your story. I know sometimes that can be hard or challenging. And for those listening, I hope you learned something. Some of you will listen to this on the audio portion of the podcast. Some of you will rewatch this, or you're watching live. At the end of the day, we all just want to be heard. We all want to know we matter. And I think that concept, it seems so easy. And I think what you're hearing today is that's what we all want. If you have questions, ask people questions, care for people. And I encourage people, in the trans community or whatever, just like Connor did today, if we're saying something that's not correct, please feel free to call us out. That is how we learn. So I want to thank all of you, Connor, Shannon, Alyssa, and Rikki, for being here. I appreciate you. I'm so proud of the work you've done on yourself and for others. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for having me.
If I could say one more thing, just for context of what's going on in America right now, as a lot of trans people know, but a lot of cis people who are listening might not, and a lot of cis queers especially might not know, the whole struggle for queer rights, gay rights, trans rights, etc., which you can trace back to Stonewall and earlier. Stonewall, a lot of accounts of the riots would credit Black trans women with starting that whole thing, and a lot of them were among the earliest and fiercest and most heavily punished advocates for our rights. So that alone is proof that there can be no queer liberation without Black power. The causes are intertwined at the root in that way. So police that's probably a bad word for it, but police queer communities for racism, because it is there just like it is everywhere, and be a good ally to not just your fellow queers of color, but to all people of color, because look at what's happening right now. So in short, Black Lives Matter, resist.
I love it. Thank you so much, everyone. And, I look forward to hearing more about all the great things you do going forward. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.